BlackRock is taking over the world and no one is stopping them.
They have that much control to get everybody to do what they want them to do. Larry Fink, the guy running BlackRock, is really the president of the United States, if we look at the kind of influence he's got.
But Larry Fink isn't content with owning companies anymore. Slowly but surely, he is taking control of the very bloodlines of the global system.
Years before Bible prophecy fully unfolds, we have the beginning of sorrows. And these next few companies and people very well could be the ones who are involved in initiating those times. Those behind Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, Larry Fink, and therefore BlackRock and the WEF. We were talking about this Agenda 21 map in one of my previous member Patreon live streams, and it was just boggling my mind to think that they were actually trying to put this forth, where the areas in red and yellow have little to no human use allowed. You can know this topic's important because when you type in Agenda 21 map on TikTok, you get no results. When you type Agenda 21, you get no results. How about Agenda 2030? No results. Why would there be no results for these agendas that are literally from worldwide global organizations that they're trying to push forth? These are not conspiracy theories. These are legitimate agendas. And as we see, there is a cover-up going on. Agenda 21 is no different from Agenda 2030. They were unsuccessful in bringing forth that agenda in 2021, which looking back, 2020 may have been one final attempt to move in that direction. They failed. So now their agenda is 2030. So to know what they're planning for 2030, let's look back at some of their unsuccessful plans for 2021.
Amongst the stated objectives of Agenda 21 is the rewilding of America through the Wildlands Project. This project would remove human beings from over half of the land in America and deem these areas core wilderness zones. Regardless of where your family farm once was, human beings will not be allowed to set foot in these areas. There would also be highly controlled and monitored buffer zones around these areas in which travel would be severely limited.
Do you notice that the main color in that map was red? That's from ICLEI, and those are areas humans will not be allowed in. It's why they are gobbling so much land in the West. In Austin, Texas, they voted 7-0 in favor of the plan. In Texas. California, not surprisingly, is all in with Agenda 21. In Los Angeles County and 5 other Southern California counties, they're calling for more than half of all new housing to be, quote, concentrated in dense so-called transit villages, with much of it at even higher 30 or more units per acre. In other words, it's a war on future suburbia. You want to buy a house an hour outside of town with an acre or two for the family? Good luck. If your area is following Agenda 21, it will not be allowed.
Having 99% of an entire nation blocked off from human use shows that their goal is absolute control. And this is consistent with their new Agenda 2030 and their sustainable development goals. These people aren't dumb. The way that they word these goals and push forth these agendas makes it sound like anyone who tries to go against it has no heart whatsoever. Of course, you want everyone to be treated kindly and no one to be poor and everyone to have food. But how is that implemented? Well, through absolute control. And when they get that control, will they actually go forth with helping everybody? Well, we've kind of failed to see that as of now. When you read on the Agenda 2030 website, under the means of implementation number 39, it's kind of scary to hear the wording. The scale and ambition of the new agenda requires a revitalized global partnership to ensure its implementation. We fully commit to this. This partnership will work in a spirit of global solidarity, in particular solidarity with the poorest and with the people in vulnerable situations. Again, note the wording to make it sound like you're a terrible person if you don't go along with their agendas. It will facilitate an intense global engagement in support of implementation of all the goals and targets, bringing together governments, the private sector, civil society, the United Nations system, and other actors, and mobilizing all available resources. The United Nations just does, well, whatever they want, really. Unelected officials controlling the world. Between the UN and the WEF, it's hard to know which one will actually set up the Antichrist world system, but hard to imagine one of them won't help, or both of them. The United Nations is meeting September 23rd to the 30th to have their supposed peace talks, in which they're pushing forth UN Assembly votes overwhelmingly to back two-state solution to Israel-Palestine conflict, which will not end in peace. God says in the prophecy in Zechariah, the nations who gather against Israel in the last days will be crushed for doing so. Those are God's words, so I for one am going to hold them in high esteem, and we're seeing that prophecy build up to that point right now. This video here is years old, but it's important to understand that the United Nations is not an organization that is governed by any laws of any nation. Even when it sets up a compound, a facility, or a meeting in America, they go by their own rules and don't care at all about the constitutional rights or the laws of any nation that they're in.
Turn off the camera and then I speak.
Oh, turn off the camera?
Yeah.
Do I not have a right to have the camera?
I'm not giving you permission to check my face, so...
Okay, are you a public servant
I'm
or?
United Nations Security Officer.
Okay. Does...
Okay.
This is my city, and so I have a right to film.
This is United Nations compound?
A United Nations compound?
Yes.
This is a compound?
Yeah. Since Sunday evening, we took over this compound. This is international territory. When you step outside, it's US. Here is international territory. This is US.
So that's the United Nations part of this video. Now let's look at Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, and also now the chairman, co-chairman of the WEF.
This is about a global game of airports, pipelines, power grids, and data routes. And right now, Larry Fink is quietly buying up the whole board. We'll get to all of that. But to understand why Larry Fink is reshaping the world, we have to start at the moment he realized he wanted to control it. Dreams about changing the world, or at least escaping it for a little while. But Larry Fink isn't your average teenager. While others chase enlightenment, Larry doesn't concern himself with such trivial matters. He's consumed by a far more important question. How can he become one of the most powerful men in the world? How can he, a shoemaker's son from nowhere, be spoken of in the same breath as presidents, CEOs, and kings?
This is a guy who always wanted more than he had. You could sense his ambition.
Politics seems like the obvious path. So naturally, once Larry hits 17, he enrolls at UCLA as a political science major. But then, something seemingly insignificant changes everything. On impulse, he enrolls in a few extra classes in real estate. Suddenly, he's not dreaming of the White House anymore, but about skyscrapers and fortunes. After 2 more years, and armed with a real estate MBA, Larry Fink is still unsure on how exactly to turn his dreams into a reality. But his goal still remains the same: power and rich.
BlackRock is the world's largest asset management firm, but the way that they're controlling economies, hostile takeover of companies, and one of the most evil things they do, in my opinion, is buying out private properties, shooting up the costs of the homes, so the average person in America now is not able to afford a home. BlackRock and the desires of Larry Fink are not just an asset management fund. Their goal is absolute control, and what they thrive off of and what they want most for that control is a totalitarian government.
Uncertainty. Markets don't like uncertainty. Markets like actually totalitarian governments where you have a understanding of what's out there, and obviously the whole dimension is changing now with, as you said, a democratization of countries, and democracies are very messy, as we know in the United States. You have opinions changing back.
The elites and globalists saw Larry's drive and desire for absolute power, and for having no regard for crushing the little guy in the process, so there was no better person to hand off the chair of the WEF to than a guy like Larry Fink.
Larry Fink has just been approved as co-chair of the World Economic Forum. Larry Fink, the guy that owns BlackRock, you know, the company that buys all the single-family homes so you can't have them, you know, with the largest stock portfolio in the entire world that has more influence and power than like 99% of countries. That Larry Fink is now co-chair of the World Economic Forum, the place where we get together to discuss how economics should work, how trade in the international space should work, business regulations. That guy is now in charge of that. This is like when Chancellor Palpatine said, "I am the Senate." This is a dystopian nightmare we're living in.
Of course, we know the WEF's goal is for us to own nothing and be happy. Larry Fink says we need to globalize the entire world under a new agenda.
I have no idea what this next 7 days are going to be, but
the next 7 years I'm very confident in. And so, yes, I mean, the United States is shaking up, I would say, the foundation of globalization, shaking up how we work together with allies. We are trying to, and I wrote about this, we need globalization 2.0. And if you go back to 2014-15, when you started having talks about Brexit, and then you ultimately had Brexit, and you had rising populism in many countries, and that is a direct result of globalization worked for the entire world, but did not work for many segments. And I think those segments were left behind, and globalization 2.2, and I think this is a fair assessment, we need to broaden the economies to make it work, working it for more. And so that's the conversation I'm having with leaders.
Do any of these control systems sound like something you don't want? You don't like not being allowed to enjoy the outdoors? You don't like having to share a car? You don't like having to get a mark in your hand or in your head to buy or sell? So you don't like any of these ideas? Well, whether it's BlackRock or the WEF or any other thing that Larry Fink is behind, he says when the people that are in his companies don't do what he likes, well, he just forces them to do whatever he wants.
You now make a point of that's an investment criteria for you.
Well, behaviors are going to have to change, and this is one thing we're asking companies. You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year, and what we are doing internally is if you don't achieve these levels of impact, your compensation could be impacted. Okay,
we're doing the same thing.
And so it's just you have to force behaviors, and if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And that's not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said. And ultimately, it's still going to take time, but I am just as much shocked as Ken is that we have not seen more opportunities, and we're going to have to force change.
I found this next video pretty weird too. Larry Fink talking about BlackRock and what they're moving forward with ETFs. And he says that one of the main goals behind what they're kind of guiding people behind is through the spirituality of BlackRock.
And so what we announced in our architectural change, iShares was this business division in itself. And we thought that's too exclusive. We needed to include the ethos, the philosophy, the spirituality of what iShares can provide in everything we do at BlackRock.
We've been seeing the physical control being manipulated in these companies and moving more into the arena of spiritual control, changing people's beliefs, not allowing them to think one way, forcing them to think another way, or they're not inclusive, things like this. And as the fallen nature of the world moves us closer to the beginning of sorrows and the Great Tribulation and the last days prophesied to us in the Bible, we will see more of these systems and companies coming out and controlling people through physical means, also through spiritual means. We're even starting to see this now with the terms of service that we agree to on every single thing we use. It's like we're moving to the point where all of the access to all of our information can be collected and utilized against us, and then people like the WEF and the UN and Palantir can come in, move people in the direction they want them to go, force them into systems, losing their freedoms, and pretty much just moving us into the position of absolute control that the Antichrist will take over in the last days. And it really looks like these companies and organizations are building the systems of absolute control that the beast will use.
Physics of everything has to do with the internet of everything, and it has to do with everything that Palantir, which is one of the investments of Peter Thiel, is that it has to do with hooking you up to the internet, hooking up every living creature on the planet to the internet, creating a hyper ledger dossier on every aspect of everyone's life, their activities of daily living, their social credit, their obedience, their compliance with the rules of the Hunger Game. It has to do with your health records, called precision medicine, also known as electronic or telemedicine. You get a different name for everything, right? Precision medicine is molecular engineering, it's neuromodulation, it's the invasion of your body autonomy, so that you have no autonomy, that you're tethered to the cloud 24/7. That's what Peter Thiel is all about. That's what the biodigital convergence is. Biodigital convergence is the combination of organic biological creatures created by God, and then on the other side, you've got electronic engineering, radiation, toxicity, the weaponization of light, photonics, sound, ultrasonics, also known as ambient temperature and sound, and PAWS, which is the pulsing, which is now we refer to as neuromodulation. Across this sorry nation, neuromodulation, also known as phased array weapon system, is neuromodulation. It's the idea of cooking humans like a microwave from the inside out, using the 80% of water retention that a living biological creature has.
One day the Antichrist will gain control of the world systems, but we don't know when that day will be. In the meantime, these different companies and organizations that are seeking globalization and taking our essential human freedoms will continue to enforce their dystopian ideas and policies on us, which isn't all that great either. We don't know when the end times will come, and as Christians, we shouldn't just be expecting Jesus to come take us away and to fix all of our problems, and not trying to do anything to make the world a better place. We should be living as if Jesus could return at any moment, and at the same time, work towards a world that we want to live in, which for me is to not have these anti-human, anti-freedom globalists in positions of power and influence. Whether we have the opportunity to stray away from these globalist organizations or not, I believe it should be our intention to work towards a pro-human and pro-freedom future. But if we are moving into the time frame of the beginning of sorrows, the Great Tribulation, vengeance is the Lord's, and he has declared the judgment that is against the wicked rulers of this world. Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights, and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people, making widows their prey, and robbing the fatherless. What will you do on the day of reckoning, when disaster comes from afar? To whom will you run for help? Where will you leave your riches? Nothing will remain but to cringe among the captives or to fall among the slain. Yet for all of this, his anger is not turned away. His hand is still upraised.